Hello, the presentation will begin shortly. Please submit your questions to the question and answer window at the bottom of the screen. And if you would like to access the French interpreter, click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to Your Role in Workplace Psychological Health, part of CCOHS's Safety and Health Week program. To begin, a few Zoom items. Please submit all questions to the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom window. Today's webinar is also offered in French. If you want to hear the presentation in French, you will find an interpretation option at the bottom of your Zoom window, where the globe icon is. We put instructions in the chat. A recording of the event will be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. We will send an email to registrants when that is available. I am Sue Freeman, your moderator for today, and I'm very pleased to be here. Before our presentations, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'd like to first welcome our speakers for today. Ann Baynton is an expert in workplace mental health and psychological safety. She consults across the country and serves as Director of Collaboration for Workplace Strategies for Mental Health, which produces free resources, complements of Canada Life for all Canadians. Ann strives to eliminate unnecessary suffering and improve lives. Ann, welcome, and tell us more about yourself and the work that you do.
Thanks a lot, Sue. We could talk about credentials or the great projects that I've been able to work on. But when Emma and I were talking about introducing ourselves, it occurred to me that since I was a little girl, I have been interested in why people do what they do. Why are some people angry and some people don't get angry? Why are some people mean and some people are kind? Why are some people suffering a lot and other people don't seem to be? And as I got older, I realized I was only seeing a moment in time in somebody's life, and that we actually are all those things at some point or another. But I do realize that some people do suffer more than is necessary. We have to suffer because of disappointment, because of frustration, because of health issues, because of loss, because of relationship breakups. Those are necessary, but we don't need to prolong them. So if you want to know who I really am is someone who wants to stop unnecessary suffering and help people really live their best lives.
Thank you, Ann. Emma Ashurst also joins us today. She is CCOHS's Inquiries and Technical Services Manager, and welcome, Emma. Emma works on various projects at CCOHS, including Osh Answers, Fact Sheets, and the Guarding Minds at Work web tool. Emma travels the country speaking on workplace mental health. She is also widely involved in many of the center's internal initiatives and has been one of 2 appointed mental health advocates at CCOHS. So please tell us more about yourself and your work, Emma.
Thanks, Sue. Lovely to join you all today and for a chat about mental health. The bio is such a weird thing to hear about yourself. But yes, like Ann, we were talking about it last night of like, how do you introduce yourself and what you do? And as I listened to Ann's a description of her passion of why. I feel it complements mine because you want to make sure that the workplace doesn't contribute to all of those things that life throws your way, and it's not one more stressor. So I work in a way that we try and create those great work environments. So work isn't a stressor to individuals, and potentially even making it a place where they can thrive and grow and improve their mental health more than just stay the same. So that's my reason for doing it. And then a little bit of background about the work that I do. The manager of the inquiries and technical services team, like you said, and we are responsible for the safety info line and the answers and the publication product. And I've had the great opportunity to work with Marianne. You mentioned Guarding Minds at Work. That was one of our first web tools that we worked on and had a great opportunity and have learned a lot from Marianne. So looking forward to the conversation, and yes, I'm looking forward to the afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, and very glad to have you both with us here today. So a few words about CCOHS. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety is Canada's national resource for the advancement of workplace health and safety. For more than 40 years now, CCOHS has promoted the physical and psychological health, safety, and total well-being of workers. We do this by collaborating and engaging stakeholders and providing information, education, tools, and solutions that will help prevent work-related injury and illness to improve the lives of workers. Today, we will be having a conversation, as both our speakers indicated, about why having a psychologically healthy workplace is important and how everyone in the workplace can participate. So let's jump right in. Here it goes for Emma. Why is having a psychologically healthy workplace important?
It's a big question, and there's a lot of different ways that you can answer it. Very simply, you could say it's good for individuals, it's good for business, which can kind of sound a little bit cold, but it is. If you've got a great work environment, everyone benefits from that. I heard a recent example that has really stuck with me, and it was a Simon Sinek example he presented on, and the shortened version of, he was in Las Vegas, he met a barista in a coffee shop, and he loved his job, like legit said, I love my work. And he's like, wow, you used the word love, like that's an emotional response to your job. Fast forward a couple of days, he saw the same worker at a different coffee shop, and he was not in love with that particular one. He's like, well, what's the difference? Like what it is? And he's like, it comes down to the environment. It comes down to the managers. So the coffee shop that I love, the managers, they support and they encourage, and it's clear what I need to do. And it's very, mentally safe for him. And then the other one, the environment was criticism and negative. And to me, that what that sticks with is that environment has such an impact on someone's well-being. And so in the workplace, we know that the employer has control over the environment as best as they can. So that responsibility is there to create a psychologically safe workplace. And by having this safe environment, that's going to help workers and individuals, and they're going to have an opportunity to flourish and thrive. And I'm really big, we always hear, especially after we just had day of mourning, and there's always that adage of we want people to come home safely. I really feel we should be bringing people home better than they arrived. And that's my 2 cents on that. That's why it's important. So everybody has an opportunity to contribute and leave in a very positively, mentally healthy way.
Thanks, Emma. Thank you. No, that was great. Marianne, is there something further that you'd like to add? Just unmute Marianne and we'll be good to go. Thank you.
There you go. That's why I don't turn it off usually. Yeah. So yes to everything that Emma said. And the analogy that I'm using with a lot of unionized blue collar kinds of workers is that if we can maximize the energy and the focus of every employee each day, there is absolutely no doubt that that will improve their ability to do their job well. It will reduce injuries, it will reduce accidents, and it will contribute to the well-being of each employee. So psychological health and safety isn't about let's all be nice and hug each other and, smile and nod a lot. In fact, in a psychologically safe workplace, you're able to speak up about concerns. You're not just smiling and nodding, but you're doing it in a way that is respectful. And in all workplaces, no matter what it is that you're doing, there's a way to support each employee to maximize their energy and focus. The issue is not to give everybody the job of their dreams, become their armchair therapist, or to become a mental health expert. In a psychologically safe workplace, everyone is maximized, optimized to do their job well.
Well, thanks, Marianne. This leads right into how can leaders create safe spaces so people can have conversations about their needs, like you were just saying.
So again, when I get to leaders, I have to say there's an emotional cost to being a leader, and anybody who's been there understands it, that you yourself have to be able to manage the many different personalities, the many different needs, but it doesn't mean that you're solving everybody's problems all the time. What it means is you're supporting their success on the job. Leave the other stuff, the mental health, the therapy, the getting into somebody's personal issues, leave that to someone else. You as a leader are actually in a position where you can hire or fire or allow somebody to be promoted or not, to be engaged in a project or not. So there's strings attached to anything that you say. Therefore, what you say should be focused on the work-related things. You can listen, but don't get involved. And I'll just give you quickly 3 questions that you can ask an employee who appears to be struggling, who appears to have needs, and maybe needs that you may not be able to satisfy. You ask, what is it that you need to be able to come to work, do a good job, and leave at the end of the day with some energy left over? The second question is, what are you willing to do differently to help you reach those goals? And the last question is, if things aren't going well, if your performance is suffering, if I see you slipping, if I see you struggling, how do you want me as a leader to approach you so that you know that I'm trying to support your success here and I'm not trying to put pressure on you? Those 3 questions can make it safe. And I'll just share one more thing. And I know Goldie got a handout with resources on it. So every resource I'm talking about is free and it's available. But we also have something called Psychologically Safe Leader Assessment, which just so happens to be at the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. And it will allow you as a leader to assess where you are now in terms of those strategies that support psychological health and safety, and give you resources, ideas, activities, templates to help you to improve it. So there's so much support. You're doing the best you can with what you've known so far. We have so much new knowledge that if you really want to be a great leader now, there's things to help you to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marianne. And now over to Emma in terms of the health and safety aspects in the workplace.
Yeah, and seem to agree with what Marianne said, and to echo that almost like specific piece of what can a leader do. They can be consistent and congruent with what they say and their actions. So that modeling that behavior and making sure that people can see that they are genuine in their actions, and when they say we believe in a psychologically safe workplace, they actually are demonstrating that to their teams and their workers, and they're aligning with the values and of the organization. So that's really important. And echoing what Marianne said there about creating the safe space. It's not the huggy feely. You don't need to be best friends with everybody at work. It helps if you have a couple of trusted people, by all means, but it's about creating a safe space where people can come forward and say, hey, that was not a great experience for me, or when you said this is how I felt, or I need this support, or can you help me? And there's actually that safety piece that they can come forward. So that's at the individual level, and that creates that space. But I think there's also an opportunity to look at how the organizational is designed and how we do our work. So looking at the workplace factors that we've heard about over the years, and looking at addressing psychological health and safety at the source, we'll call it. So we tie in some of our traditional safety language of hierarchy of control, and where do we put our interventions and our controls. We put them at the source, and we try to eliminate. So can we get rid of potential sources of stress? So can we make sure jobs are really clear and people understand what they need to do, so that eliminates a potential stress point? When we design our projects, can we put good structures in place? Do we have enough resources? Do we have enough time? So again, trying to design the work in such a way that reduces potential for stress and negative impact to mental health. Again, if we equate it to that safety language, it's the equivalent of fixing the machine, that noisy machine, instead of just saying, go put some hearing protection on because it's noisy. And so the same equivalent would be doing these organizational design interventions and addressing the factors, instead of just saying, okay, we've got an EAP program that you can use, or let's do some resilience training, or make sure you go take a walk. All of those things are important, but they can't be the sole source of your mental health program. We talk about layering controls in safety, and it's the exact same thing. So it's important to have those tertiary or secondary interventions, but you also need the primary ones. And those are making sure you've got the right leaders in place that understand and are committed to making the change and model that behavior that we want to see. And then that will trickle down into the organization. So that's where I would go with the why the leaders to create the safe workplace.
Can I add something, Sue?
So absolutely, go right ahead.
Just thinking about a conversation that I had earlier today, and the leader was saying, well, the employees, some of the employees are stressed out, but there's more demand and they want things turned around within 24 hours. And I said, like what? And they said, well, like this meeting that was planned. I said, meetings aren't planned in 24 hours. Like, you're the leader. You can't just say, well, this is what they're demanding. You as the leader need to say, you're going to burn out my employees, that we can do this as an exception. This can't be the rule. And the leader got it and went, oh, right, I'll do it. But what the original conversation was this is the way it is. And it's like, no, that's not leadership. Mm-hmm. That's just you taking the pressure and pushing it on down. And I was really impressed because this leader said, you're right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, give them some more rules and regulations and parameters, and we're going to change things. So that's leadership in a psychologically safe way.
Yeah. And the one more point layered on that is also putting things through that psychological safe lens. So when you're making those decisions and you're thinking, what is the impact of this thing we're about to do? Don't just think of, well, how much is it going to cost the organization? Is it ergonomically safe? Is it going to impact production or whatever? What is the people impact? By doing this today, tomorrow, next week, how will that impact an individual's mental health, and positively or negatively? Like, let's focus on some of these changes and impact it positively as well. But definitely that psychological, that people lens. How does it impact people?
No, you both covered some essential points, I believe, for our conversation today. And indicating to us about leading indicators as well as lagging ones and the importance of prevention. So wonderful. And we're moving into about how people, I'm going to go back to yourself, Marianne, on any level of employment can speak up for themselves and advocate for a positive, safe workplace.
So this, my answer is going to come from work that I did originally with people with mental illnesses like depression or anxiety, and being able to speak up and advocate for what they need. But like a lot of the work that I've done around helping individuals who are going through a tough time in their life, whether it's a life stressor, a mental health issue, or a physical health issue, translate to everybody. So this is a process that I call coaching up. And what I say is, don't go and complain or whine or blame, because leaders are human beings. They're going to get their back up, they're going to get defensive, or they may already be overwhelmed or frustrated or insecure about themselves. That's just human nature. So we want to approach them in a way that they can hear us and respond. So think about it from their perspective. What do they need from us? We are an employee, and they need us to be able to do our job successfully so that they can do theirs successfully. So that's the approach. You go to them and say, I'd like to do my job well. I'd like to be a great employee. I'm going through some stuff right now that is impacting my health, my focus. You don't have to tell them any more than that, just whatever you're going through. And there are some things that I think would really help me to do my job better at this time. And I wonder if I could share those with you. And then you actually say, what is it you need to do your job? Not what you need in your life, not what you need emotionally or psychologically, but what you need. And it could be, right now, I'm feeling that I need more consistent feedback. I need to know if I'm doing a good job, because I'm filled with doubt. And if you don't mind just stepping that up right now, that would be really helpful for me. And the second part is telling them what you're going to do for yourself, because it's important that they see you're not just depending on them for everything, that you're not just asking them. So if we follow that example, that I'm also going to start to record my accomplishments each day, or at least a few things that I'm proud of, so that I can create this reinforcement for myself. And would you mind if I shared that with you so that I can check in with you? Am I being objective? And then the last thing is, I need you to give me feedback about how I'm doing. And I really, if you feel like I'm not doing something right, then the best thing for me is for you to put in writing what you would like instead and how you'll measure that. And then I can follow through. Now, this is just one example of one particular issue, but almost anything that you can think of. This is what I need. This is how I'm going to do things differently to support my own success. And this is how I want you to give me feedback. This is coaching up, advocating for yourself without it coming across as, oh, there's Marianne complaining again, or whining about this, or yeah, she's going through something in her life. So's everybody else. This way they can hear me, because it's like, oh, okay, I'm supporting your success, which supports mine.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Marianne. And back to you for just a moment, because I'm going to get you to start us off. How would you address this in different environments? Unions, large versus small organizations, office versus the field?
Yes, and that's the beauty of it, because psychological health and safety is simply how we treat each other on a daily basis. That's all it is. So it can be done on a tailgate. It can be done sitting on a toolbox. It can be done anywhere. In unionized environments, here's the thing. When the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health and Safety was created, there were 3 people that were union representatives on that committee, and they made substantial and very useful contribution to the standard. unions exist to support their members, to make sure that they're safe in work. This is a union issue. And unions are required not just to support their members' well-being and safety, including psychological safety, but they're required to walk the talk. They can't ask for the standard and say, we're not going to be respectful. We're not going to be protecting psychological safety. We're not going to be helping people in that way, but you have to. So it becomes something that if only organizations would see their union as a partner on this, not the opposition, start it from the beginning and say, you know, we might have disagreements about benefits. We might have disagreements about salaries, but on this, let's do it together. How can we work to protect the psychological health and safety of every member? Now, that's in unionized environments. I think they have such a great opportunity to create something beautiful. In the smaller businesses, it really comes down to that one person, right? Whoever the owner is usually is responsible. In some really small businesses, there's no HR, there's no OC health. But what my suggestion is to small businesses, don't do it on your own. Do it as a team. Say, we want to create the best environment we can for ourselves. What does that look like? And then when you have a vision with your team of what kind of interactions you want to have, then you say, what are the behaviors, words, and actions that take us towards this kind of environment? And what are the behaviors, words, and actions that take us away from this? And how will we respectfully remind each other when we're not going towards it? Because any of us can have a bad day. And you come up with this team agreement, and the team agreement process is also in the handout, but you come up with this team agreement that's unique to your team, made by your team. And it's in the language that you use. It's culturally appropriate. It's inclusive because your team made it. And then you just hold each other. We go to work every day. We are, and the way I say it is, we're freaking adults. We are not children who feel like we're victims on the playground. We can decide as a group, you know what? Nobody wants to be stressed out. We have our other lives that we need to have energy to go home and contribute to. So let's make work a refuge. Sure, we're going to work hard, but we're going to work hard in a place where we can breathe, where we can be our best selves. I just want to add, I always love when someone says, well, you want to bring your whole self to work. Well, what if my whole self is a cranky, miserable SOB? Like, you really want me to bring all that to work? But with these team agreements, we say, sure, you're going to go through stuff. Sure, you're going to have a bad day, but you're not going to take it out on us, and we won't take it out on you. So here's our agreement about what we will do on a good day and a bad day. And we all have the ability to do it.
Indeed, we do. So further thoughts from Emma?
I agree wholeheartedly. And the bit that is really important is to make sure that there's that environment for it. And I know bordering on, I can't say it anymore, but beating a dead horse. But that environment piece is important, because we want to make sure that people can speak up and have these agreements and offer that feedback to one another, and have that intentional noticing of, you know, hey, I noticed this, and is everything okay? All of those conversation pieces. So having that team, you're all in it together, and that agreement piece is helpful, because and then you can hold each other accountable to it as well. So you can, it serves as a conversation starter as well. If there are things that are troubling someone, or you notice something, you can talk to them about it. And you have a reference point. You're not going in cold. Marianne, you go. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking but you know what I'll add to that, Emma, is that when we studied trauma, And when we studied burnout and when we studied other types of upset or distress, they often come from being blindsided, from having unexpected things happen. And when we as a team can say, no, when you're having a bad day, this is how we're going to respond, we don't suddenly feel humiliated or criticized, or it's something that's expected. So it's something that is not blunt force trauma, right?
Yeah.
That we can hear it. On my team, our sort of trigger word when somebody is behaving in a stressed out, frustrated way is just breathe. But when we hear the word from our own team, we hear, I care about you. I can see that you're upset or frustrated or stressed. I know you don't want me to have the impact of that. And I know that once I tell you this, that you are going to do what you can to bring yourself down to a place of balance. So it's a very kind, supportive thing to do. Whereas if I suddenly said to Sue, hey, Sue, take a breath. Like, yeah, she'd be making that face.
Yeah.
But when we know it, when we expect it, when we have decided on it,
yeah,
then we hear it in the way that it was intended.
I know Sue's asking the question, but I'm going to ask a question. I hope you don't mind, Sue. but what do you do when you have private people on your team that they don't feel comfortable sharing that yet? Sorry, Sue.
Sharing what?
Like that's even setting up that agreement piece, right? To make sure that we're all okay sharing ourselves with the group.
So there's no need to share any personal information in this process. What we're sharing is how we want to interact with each other. And there's always going to be people who are very private, and there's always going to be people who want to tell us every detail of every moment of every day. And the team agreement sort of helps both of those extremes to say, yes, this is the way that we agree we're going to interact. It's not going to pry into your privacy. It's also not going to allow you to not interact at all. It's not going to shut you up. It's also not going to let you continue to monopolize a meeting, right? So we have balance, and it's not personal. This is what we decided.
What a wonderful dialogue around a multitude of things that could be actioned as soon as this event is over, I imagine. So from our very engaged audience, I have something for you both. And I think I'm going to start off with yourself, Emma. It sounds like a very practical question. Do you recommend having a standalone policy or tie psychological health and safety and well-being to existing health and safety and human resource practices?
I think there is an element of taking stock of where you're at. I don't think there's a standard answer to that. Sometimes you got to separate it out and then put it back in, or it depends on where you're at in your, we'll call it health and safety journey. I think, and in fact, it was something I learned from Marianne. It was the meet people where they're at, and also that you may need to segregate it out and have a separate mental health or psychological health and safety policy first, and then weave it into your overall. I think there should be a goal that it becomes your overall. This is just the way that we work. This is our health and safety policy, and it addresses a multitude of hazards, including ergonomics, physical, psychosocial hazards, and that should be the goal. But you have to assess where you are first to achieve that. Marianne, did you have anything else? Yeah. I kind of align with what you're.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is there is not a policy in the workplace or a program or a process. There may be some procedures, but not many processes that shouldn't have a review in terms of, is it psychologically healthy and safe? What are the impacts? What else could I do? But again, as you say, you start where the client's at. You start where, if the employer says you must put it over here, then start there. but it will be way more effective if you embed it in the way business is done every day. And one of the biggest reasons for that is if you can impact HR policy, if you can impact recruiting and promotion and even discipline policy, then when the focus goes away from psychological health and safety to something like a pandemic or sustainability or something else that's going to take precedent, it's embedded. Therefore, you're not throwing the whole thing out. So always seek to embed it in the way business is done. Yeah.
No, that's excellent feedback again for really great questions coming in. We have a few more. So let's try this one on. I'm going to talk a little bit from a stigma prevention type of place when I'm asking this. That's the context. How would biases and microaggressions be addressed? Are there ideas that we have around that, and we're thinking maybe from that stigma or non-inclusion place?
Let me just give a quick answer that they should look up implicit bias on workplace strategies for mental health. There's a workshop you can facilitate, and it is quite life-changing, if I may say, because it talks about microaggressions in a way that people get it without feeling defensive. It talks about intersectionality. So you start to think, as Michael Burke, he wrote, I think it's called Birds of Different Feathers or something, but he used to be the head of the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And he said he's a white man. So people go, well, you got privilege, you got entitlement. And he said, I do, but I'm also a white man with a disability, and I'm a gay white man. And so when we start to understand that we don't know people by the way that they look, we don't know people even by the way that they've been introduced, that we need to stop and wonder. I think learning that, everybody should learn that so that we can be more open-minded. If we only address microaggressions by catching somebody saying something and say, oh, that's inappropriate, we create more stress, less psychological safety. But if we help people, microaggressions by their very nature are things that most people would say, well, I didn't mean it. Okay, so let me help you learn so that you can mean what you say. Yeah.
And I would say it's important, not from a gotcha type moment, but it is important to address them though, because that there is something known as like a spiral of incivility, and what starts as little microaggressions, and when they don't learn from them, like you try and give everybody, you grant from grace, you give everybody, you assume people are coming from a good place and good intentions. But after you've had that conversation, you say, hey, just so you know, that didn't land how you probably intended it to, then you need to make sure that's addressed, because that microaggression can lead to a little bit more incivility, which can lead to potentially bullying, harassment, all the way up to potentially violence. So definitely important to address that in the workplace if it is something that you're seeing.
We did a survey, 5,500 people across Canada, on psychological health and safety. And when you look at the big numbers, you would think that people with disabilities or people that were visible minorities or people that had other things going on, other groups, were doing really well in Canada, until you dig a little deeper, because we start to understand that many people were raised or taught to be very gracious, to be very positive about their workplace, about their leaders. But when you dig a little deeper and you say, who's being bullied? Who is being discriminated against? Who is not feeling heard? When you dig into the data, you see that these groups are still not getting the equity that they deserve. And so, yes, we have to work harder at it, and we can't use big numbers and say, oh, look, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's another question here about feedback. and I think it goes along the lines of what we're discussing today. If someone in an employment role, manager, supervisor, is not providing the written feedback, what to do? What are our thoughts on that?
My thought is feedback doesn't have to be written, but it needs to be prompt, related to whatever it is, constructive, and it needs to be specific. In other words, if I'm not doing something right, I don't need you to tell me that I'm not doing something right. I need you to tell me what I need to do differently. What do I need to be successful at that? How will you measure it? And then help me to get there. So the idea of these formal performance management reports, I can take them or leave them, but constantly seeking to support the success and the growth of every employee is what feedback is for. And it can be done in many ways to do that. Now, in some organizations, you don't have a choice, right? You're told how to give feedback, when to give feedback. But to me, if I'm not supporting the success of an employee on an ongoing basis, I'm failing at feedback. Emma?
Yeah, I agree. The performance reviews, I'm not a huge fan of. Like a one a year, I don't know. I think they should be a lot more timely. Like people should know where they stand pretty much day to day, week to week. Like you should know how you're doing. And again, hopefully you have an environment that you feel comfortable going to your leader, your boss, your supervisor and say, am I doing okay? Or can you help me with this? Or, and vice versa, the leader knows how to have that conversation in a very structured, supportive way that isn't, negative is the only word that's coming to my mind, but it's a leaning in with curiosity of talk to me about what's going on here. I've noticed this, and I know that like I'm noticing this, and I know this isn't what you're intending, and how do we get you to a different spot? And it's a very clunky conversation, but sometimes that's what it's like. They are clunky and they can be tricky and they're hard on both sides of the table, but they're worth it. That's all I will say, is that feedback isn't this beautiful thing that you see. Sometimes it is tricky because, echoing what Marianne said, we're also human, and we have good days, bad days of how we do some of these things. But I think the main point is to just try and keep working with each other on that. It's a very long-winded answer saying that feedback is important, and yes.
Well, I'm going to bounce it right back to you, Emma, because we can continue on with, so all that, but now let's talk about the virtual work environment.
Oh.
How to navigate psychological health and safety within that.
I'll be honest, and it's tricky. It's very tricky because from a very practical point of view, connection issues, lagging, and messages can be misinterpreted, or the internet freezes up the exact wrong moment that you need it to. So I will speak from experience. I do run into some challenges of timing my conversations if I know that I need them to be of a certain way, or I want it to be in that supportive way. And I recognize that virtual is definitely one of the cons of this situation. I think it can be done. And I think the more you have the relationship with your team, it makes it easier because you can have those conversations a little bit easier. There's a bit more grace, but the virtual bit, it does lead itself. So what I would say is if there's an opportunity to meet in person for some of these conversations, it's worth it to have that.
Yeah, so I'd agree that if you have never met your staff in person, it's a very important thing to do at some point. How many days a week is really dependent on the organization. But the other thing I'd say about remote work in particular, as opposed to hybrid, is that we need to keep talking about How are you dealing with the stressors of working remotely? What do you do? How do you manage your day? How do you not get, screen fatigue? How do you manage if your kids are yelling at you? These conversations keep people grounded, keep people feeling like we're all in it together, that you see me, you hear me. And it's as simple as that. Somebody said to me, earlier in the pandemic, well, how am I supposed to know if somebody's struggling? We're on screens. Because if you're having the conversation on a regular basis, you'll notice. So if we never talk about coping, if we never talk about the strategies that we're using, if we never talk about the stressors, then yes, it's difficult, but it should be a regular part of conversation. Let's just check in, what's the best strategy you have to deal with stressors right now? What are you doing so that we can share?
We did that in one of our team meetings was, what are some of your coping strategies and what do you do and it's a good icebreaker. I hate icebreakers, but it's a good icebreaker as well. The fun share of your team meetings and talk about it, and you normalize that as well. And then you're also showing different ways to handle the stress.
Yeah. Great.
Well, that was quite an incredible round, and we were spurred on by the excellent questions received. And those 3 questions that you mentioned earlier to ask, Marianne, we're going to derive those from you and get those back out to the audience, because there's been some really healthy demand for that. So that brings us to almost a conclusion of this wonderful conversation with 2 really amazing people that I've known and been with and had the pleasure to do some work over these years. So thank you. And for all your insightful questions, those in the audience, we're out of time. But if you have further questions, we encourage you to reach out to our safety info line. The link has been shared in the chat. So that concludes our program for today. Thank you to both of our speakers. Thank you to our entire production team and those at CCUHS and those listening. Please take a few minutes to fill out the short survey that will open in a new tab once the session ends, and help us make our future events even better. All registrants will receive a link to the recording of today's presentation in the coming days. Look for that in your inbox. We hope to see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We're back again. We're going to be talking about fostering an inclusive workplace with our own CCUHS Yvonne DeFreitas, HR, Human Resources, and Operations Vice President Janet Manella. The registration link has also been shared in the chat. So before we close, again, acknowledging our panel of very talented, knowledgeable speakers, Marianne, Emma, always a pleasure, and for all that time devoted to preparing and sharing. It's appreciated very much by CCUHS, and I'm sure I can say that our audience, our attendees, appreciated that as well. Thank you again all for joining us. Have a safe afternoon, and bye for now.